Hi, and welcome to the Erie Drift Plains Native Plant Summit. This gathering was created to share knowledge, spark curiosity, and connect people who care about native plants and the places they live. Each session brings a different perspective, but all are rooted in the same idea that small, thoughtful actions, when taken together, can support healthier landscapes and stronger communities. Today's session comes to us from Amber Stilwell, Coastal Outreach Specialist working in the Lake Erie region, who joined Pennsylvania Sea Grant in August 2021. She is responsible for planning, developing, implementing, and evaluating regional outreach programs with a focus on healthy ecosystems and watershed restoration. Her main focus areas include aquatic invasive species and water quality in the Lake Erie and Ohio River watershed. Additionally, Amber is responsible for coordinating the Penn State Extension Master Watershed Steward Program in Erie, Crawford, and Warren counties. The program launched in August of 2021 and continues to grow in popularity with volunteers and partnering organizations at the center.
Hi, everyone. My name is Amber Stilwell. I'm a Coastal Outreach Specialist with Pennsylvania Sea Grant. I also coordinate the Master Watershed Stewards in Northwest Pennsylvania as part of Penn State Extension. And I'm excited to have been invited to present about our project called Choose Native at the Native Plant Summit for Wild Ones. So before I get started about our project, I wanted to talk a little bit about the missions of Pennsylvania Sea Grant and Penn State Extension. So to start us off with Pennsylvania Sea Grant, every state that touches the Great Lakes or an ocean has a Sea Grant program. There are 34 programs nationwide, and we are funded federally through NOAA, as well as receive funding from state and local resources and grants. And in Pennsylvania, our mission is to promote the sustainability of Pennsylvania's ecological and economic coastline and watershed resources through science-based research, education, and outreach. Penn State Extension is a team that consists of a collection of educators and associates and faculty that come together when expertise is needed. Our team members live and work alongside Pennsylvanians, and we have a vested interest in ensuring that our products and services better our communities. Choose Native was a collaboration across many different programs. It started with an idea formed at the Great Lakes Commission Organisms and Trade Committee, and that idea was brought into conception and visualization through collaboration with the Great Lakes Commission, Pennsylvania Sea Grant, and Penn State Extension. The grant was submitted by the Great Lakes Commission to the Richard King Mellon Foundation, and the project was executed by Pennsylvania Sea Grant as the lead, in Pennsylvania, Penn State Extension supporting, and the Great Lakes Commission at a regional scale. The Choose Native team consisted of myself, the project team leader, Beth Yunt and Justin Mansberger from Penn State Extension, Kelly Donaldson, and Zach Nemec from Pennsylvania Sea Grant. And we also need to thank our many, many wonderful volunteers that were participants in this project. Master Watershed Stewards and Master Gardeners came together across the state of Pennsylvania to make this project possible. So before I dive into the project, I want to talk a little bit about why it's important. So one of the goals of this project is to educate people about the impacts of invasive species. So if you're interested in native plants, then you're well aware that invasive species can harm our native species. They can increase competition between native species. They can alter habitats completely. They can also impact our economy by creating safety concerns and impacting recreation and tourism. They can also impact water quality. And as a native plant advocate myself, the importance of native species cannot be understated. They support our native habitats, they benefit water quality, they provide adequate resources that are necessary to the rest of the ecosystem, they diversify and strengthen the gene pool and the ecosystem itself, and they provide ecosystem services like goods and fuel and all those things that we need to survive. They also provide cultural significance. Invasive and non-native introductions occur primarily through human pathways, and one of those pathways is through the landscaping and water gardening industry. The sale of non-native species is a primary pathway for invasive species introduction in the United States because we choose them for their ease of care, aesthetics, and durability. 61% of plants that are determined to be invasive in the United States are still available for purchase. One of the examples that we can touch upon is water garden introductions. We build water gardens to design and display non-native, ornamental, aquatic plants and animals. And some of those introductions of invasive animals and plants can come through accidents or deliberate. Accidental introductions would be things like rainstorms, accidentally washing plants and seeds and animals and other items from a water garden into a nearby waterway. Deliberate introductions can also occur, whether that is through draining or directly dumping water garden plants and animals into a nearby waterway for aesthetic reasons or for discarding reasons. A great case study for us to look at is that of the water hyacinth. This beautiful flowering aquatic plant is native to the Amazon basin and was introduced in the Florida waterways as a souvenir. It is unfortunately one of the fastest growing known plant species, and once it took root in Florida, it took Florida over 100 years, millions of dollars to get just a limited amount of control on the infestation. Because of this and because of its invasive nature, water hyacinth is now banned in many states and it's illegal to possess in Florida, but it still remains available for sale over the internet. We can also look at landscaping introductions. Non-native species encompass about 80% of plant inventory in greenhouses in the United States. Most of these species do not spread and escape cultivation, but some can and do spread into natural areas. The traits that make these non-native species attractive in landscaping can be the same traits that cause them to become invasive. Those traits can be things like being disease and pest resistant, having high fertility and germination rates, and a high survivability and adaptability. The horticulture industry in the United States is a primary source of introductions of non-native and invasive plants into our landscapes, but it's not as easy as just pointing fingers at the horticulture industry. It's a complex web of the livelihood of the horticulturists, and this being the way that they make money and support their families, and also this complex web of invasive species lists that might differ from state to state. A great case study for landscaping introductions is Japanese barberry. This was introduced as an alternative to the common barberry, which hosts the black stem rust. Japanese barberry is now on Pennsylvania's noxious weeds list and is being banned from cultivation and sale because it has the ability to escape cultivation and invade forests and other natural habitats. So, the Choose Native project is a way to disrupt this system and bring attention to native plants as a way to add value to the ecosystem and to your property. So, the Choose Native project exposes this known pathway of invasive plants, whether that is accidental or deliberate introductions of non native species through water gardening and landscaping. The project aimed to deliver invasive plant prevention information to water garden hobbyists and landscapers from trusted sources, to build a market for native plants in the state of Pennsylvania, and to provide community members with the tools that they need to prevent the spread of invasive species. The first step in this project was to create a survey that would be disseminated to nurseries, wholesalers, aquarium shops, and plant sellers that I will henceforth call growers and sellers. We received 33 total responses. 21 of those responses were direct connections that volunteers made to growers and sellers in their communities, and they helped them fill out the survey. 12 of those responses were anonymous through an electronic survey disseminated through the Pennsylvania Landscaping and Nursery Association newsletter. And although 33 responses is a small amount given the number of growers and sellers in the state of Pennsylvania, I was really happy to see the distribution occur in the farthest northwest corner of Pennsylvania and the farthest southeast corner of Pennsylvania, meaning that we were able to hit all of the growing zones across Pennsylvania as we took the information resulting from the survey and built our project. So, in this survey, we asked the growers and sellers to respond to questions like, what are your top selling aquatic plants? What are your top selling shrubs? And whatever they listed is what you see here on the screen. We see Nymphaea species, which is a water lily species. That is the top selling aquatic plant determined by growers and sellers through this survey. We also see Nelumbo species, Pontedera species, and many other species of aquatic plants. But what we could glean from this project is that water lilies are very popular. We can take that information and say, okay, we can suggest a native water lily in place of some of the invasive species that might be on this list that are top sellers. And if we look at our invasive species, we have water hyacinth, which is Acornia crucifix, which also could be listed as Acornia species. And we also have the Pistia species or water lettuce varieties that are invasive and being sold in the state of Pennsylvania. So we can say, okay, are there situations, are there species of water lilies that are native that we can offer as alternatives to these invasive species. Also, we can look at this list and see if there are any native species offered in this list. And we can find one here, Iris versicolor. That's our native blue flag iris. It's in any situation where we can offer that as an alternative, we can because it's already in the market and we can suggest that people buy it and plant it. And this is just illustrating that Iris versicolor and also Pontedera species is also one of our native pickerel weed. So we can offer those as alternatives whenever possible. So if we look at the top selling shrubs according to the Growers and Sellers survey, we can see that rhododendrons and spireas and hydrangeas were really, really popular. Unfortunately, we also had the popularity of the Euonymus alatus or burning bush as a very popular invasive species that's in the market. But what we can do here is the same thing as the previous slide. We can look and say, okay, are there native rhododendrons? Are there native hydrangeas that we can suggest to be planted instead or as an alternative to burning bush that's in the market? If we compile a list of native species that are currently being sold according to the survey, you can see that viburnums, ninebarks or physocarpus, Lobelia cardinalis or the cardinal flower, and Clethra alnifolia or sweet pepper bush are at the top of the list. So we can capitalize on this information by recommending these species whenever possible throughout the guide that we ended up developing from this information. In order to establish those native alternatives, we utilized the survey information, but we also did a lot of research and worked with a lot of career experts. So, what we did is essentially we took the list of non native species that were resulting from the Growers and Sellers survey, but we also worked with those career experts to say, what else is being sold that you've heard of? Are there things in surrounding states that we should include in our guide and in our outreach materials in order to be cognizant of what the future might hold? We then worked with those career experts and did our own research to find native alternatives that were hopefully within our grower and seller survey list, but also had similar bloom times, growth heights, flower colors, soil and light requirements, water quality and depth requirements, and hardiness zones to the non native plants in our list so that they would be accurate and adequate alternatives. Please keep in mind, though, that there is no such thing as a one-to-one substitution in the plant world. Anything that we suggest will still have its own needs, and it may not be as hardy and durable as some of those invasive species because, again, the native species are native in our area. They do have their own declines and things like that, but those invasive species that we love to plant or the ones that we don't necessarily maybe know are invasive but are potentially the next big invasive, we plant them because they have those qualities of durability and pest resistance and things like that. So there's no such thing as a one-to-one substitution, but think of the next following slides as a simple guide for our community to try to plant more natives on their properties instead of introducing those invasive species. So let's return to our example of water hyacinth. Ecornia crecipes, like I said before, it is a beautiful flowering plant, but it is highly, highly invasive. So when we look at our list, we can think back to what was available in the list of grower and seller survey results. And one of the things that was available was that Pontedera cordata or pickerel weed. If you compare and contrast the characteristic needs of water hyacinth and pickerel weed, they are very similar. And fortunately, the pickerel weed actually has a much bigger hardiness zone, zones 3 to 10 it will survive in. It does grow a bit taller than the water hyacinth, but that is something that anyone who wants to plant a plant should always be cognizant of and look that information up to see, maybe I shouldn't plant this at the part of my pond where I want to sit and view. Maybe it's better on the opposite end of my pond. I'd love some beautiful flowering plants out there, so let's plant some pickerel weed out in the landscape instead of that water hyacinth. And we can use a terrestrial example as well. Privet is a very common terrestrial plant that is used widely in landscaping in Pennsylvania. It can be found under many different scientific names. The ligustrum species is what we see it mostly listed as, but it can be Ligustrum sinense, Ligustrum vulgara, and you can see here the characteristics and the flower there within our survey revealed that sweet pepper bush or Clethra alnifolia was one of those that is widely available or utilized in the landscaping industry. or available from growers and sellers. And you can see that the flowering part is actually quite similar and the characteristics align pretty well. And in this case, privet actually has a shorter bloom time than a sweet pepper bush, which is a really wonderful thing when you're considering what people mostly want and desire when they're thinking about native plants. They're thinking about bloom times, they're thinking about where I can plant this in my yard so that it won't die. And sweet pepper bush actually has a wider variety of soil that it can survive in, a wider variety of light requirements, and a larger hardiness zone, in addition to a longer bloom time. So, wonderful, wonderful native replacement for privet. I want to touch briefly upon some industry barriers for increasing native species sales because we can talk all day about the importance of this. We can say, and we know, and the industry knows how important native species are. But we asked the growers and sellers to tell us why or why not you may be offering native species or maybe not offering native species in your businesses. And this is just a small short list of some common themes that we saw from the 33 respondents. So many native plants lack the appeal of ornamentals. So that goes back to that like ease of care and durability. The second bullet point there, some native plants can be unruly and less showy. So that is true. Some native plants do require a bit more maintenance if you want to keep them looking trim and manicured. And there's also a lack of suppliers with straight species or stock large enough for landscaping. So if a landscaper is attempting to order all native plants, but they're working on a really big project, they have to order so far in advance that it almost makes the project impossible for them to order the amount of native species that they would need. Native plants don't sell as well as ornamentals. The showy, long lasting blooms are desired by customers, too busy to expand into selling native species, and more education about native species in landscaping is needed. So, these are all wonderful points from industry that we wanted to touch upon and make sure are well heard because these are all barriers that make it harder for people to find native plants. So we also asked the question how often customers are requesting native plants when they come into a grower and seller's shop. What you're looking at here are the percentage of customers that request native plants, just as an average from the memory of the person doing the survey. And what we can glean here is that only about 35% of customers asked for native plants 10% of the time. So that means, a small amount of customers are coming in and asking for native plants, and 10 to 25% are asking about 38% of the time. So a little bit higher, essentially saying that customers are requesting them a little bit, but not a lot. And then 27% of the time, customers are requesting them 25 to 50% of the time. So I apologize for all the percentages, but it makes more sense if I go through them all. If you go all the way up to the 100%, so the 100% customers coming in and asking for native plants, zero respondents said yes. So no one is asking for native plants 100% of the time. Maybe individual people, but that's not the customer experience at the grower and seller level. They're getting people that are coming in about half the time to a third of the time asking for native plants. So there's not enough demand for them in their industry in order for them to say it is worth it to start adding native species to our stock list. We saw this as a big gap and we thought, if we can educate customers and landscapers and water garden hobbyists about what plants they could be asking for and how to ask for them, then that might be really, really helpful. And so we developed a Choose Native guide that features a non native from the list of plants that are in the industry and then native alternatives. So you see here, the cover of the book looks like that. And then this is a single page layout where we have the featured non-native. In this case, it's the calorie pear with a little bit of information about it. And then we have, in addition, the native alternatives. So in this case, we featured green hawthorn and pagoda dogwood as native alternatives to the calorie pear. We also engaged with industry professionals and the community. We hosted 4 workshops across the state, one in Northwest PA, one in Philadelphia, one in Pittsburgh, and then a regional webinar with the goals of identifying and managing key invasive or non-native species for the attendees. So we wanted them to walk away with more information about doing that. We also wanted them to walk away with skills obtained in native plant knowledge in landscaping and water gardening. So, essentially, how to care for these plants once they're established and how to maintain them. And we also wanted to teach them how to create a management plan for invasives and for native replacements. So, thinking through the steps of removing that invasive species and what is the aftercare? How often do you have to check your property for that invasive species? Because if it carried seeds or root tubers or something like that were left over, it could pop up again. And then also thinking about the maintenance required for those native replacements in addition to the invasive species management. Just some results from our workshop evaluations. 76% of folks that attended the workshop and 66% of the folks that attended the webinar fully agreed that these workshops advanced their knowledge of native plants in landscaping and water gardening. And I'll add that we had a fully agreed, and then a neutral. So this is just that they fully agreed. So most people fell into that fully agreed and agreed category when they filled out this survey. So, just some final considerations as we wrap up this presentation. Consider plant names. When you walk into a shop and you're looking for a plant, common names can vary. Like with the example of privet, we call it privet, but the scientific name can also vary. So it's really important that we do our research and we know to ask for the scientific name when we show up somewhere looking for plants. When the scientific names change, it can take several years for nurseries and industry to adopt those new and updated scientific names. But remember that there may be many, many different common names for the same scientific named plant. Essentially, do a little research. If you're looking for something specific, I hope you're not looking for privet. I use that as an example because there were multiple features. But if you're looking for something like sweet pepper bush, do a little research ahead of time to see what other names it might be listed under and what other things that you can be prepared to hear or ask for when you go looking for native plants. I ask you to consider cultivars, whether you think that they are a beneficial or drawback. I'm not going to get into that debate, but I just want to make people aware of what cultivars are. So, cultivars are a plant variety that has been produced by cultivation through selective breeding. Their benefits are that they tend to be sterile, they have longer lasting blooms, they are disease and pest resistant, and they're hardy. The drawbacks is that they're less ecologically significant with a few exceptions, meaning that they provide less adequate food sources and habitat for specific insects, birds, and mammals that might be looking for that straight native species to feed upon. So they're not as nutritious, they might lack nutritional value, and the blossoms also might be a little bit different than what the pollinators are used to, so they won't be able to recognize them. So, a small amount of cultivars can be great to add to the landscapes, especially if you have those favorite ornamental species that you're like, I absolutely love this. I don't want to not have it on my property. So, consider a cultivar something that is sterile. But if the goal is to provide habitat for pollinators or for insects, if you're trying to provide habitat, then cultivars may not be your best option. The best thing to do is to think about why you're choosing this plant. If it's for habitat benefit, then maybe go with a straight native species. If it's to beautify a space and you're not concerned about the habitat, then maybe choose a cultivar for that area and choose a smaller amount of cultivars so that you can have what you like to see, but also adding that native habitat. So consider right plant, right place. I love this concept that was developed by one of my volunteers called Interview Your Plant. Essentially, consider the soil type, light requirements, water availability, and space needed for that plant to grow successfully. And choose a native plant that will succeed in specific areas of a landscape or a type of water garden. The last thing we want to be doing is planting all these native plants and having them not survive. So it's really, really a great idea to do your research, to be able to interview that plant and see what's going to be the right plant for the right place on your property. And then the last consideration is to develop that maintenance plan. So just like we worked through with landscapers and water garden hobbyists, consider developing your own maintenance plan, which would include things like improving invasive species management by learning and writing down and creating a calendar of when and how to treat and remove that invasive species, what proper disposal methods look like, and then always checking for regrowth and how often you should be checking. And then the second part of your maintenance plan is to maintain native plants in our landscape. So Thinking about and researching seasonal care and adding that to your maintenance plan and your maintenance calendar, cutting, pruning, dividing, and more considerations to keep those native landscapes looking sharp. Finally, just some conclusions for you to walk away with. We want to really adjust our thinking from this manicured, trim landscape to thoughtful and intentional water gardening and landscaping. Finding that balance between natives and non natives and being thoughtful and intentional about what we're planting and why we're planting it can help us make these decisions and move forward with growing our habitat in our own backyards. So, we're suggesting a more thoughtful approach and just asking some simple questions before you start planting. Asking yourself, can the same or a similar look or function be achieved with a native species in this area of my yard or my water garden? Can a native species be incorporated to enhance ecosystem benefits? Can we change our perspective about the look and feel of what we think landscapes and water gardens look like? Essentially, can we think about letting things be a little wilder than we're used to in order to let them grow and have less maintenance for ourselves too? And then finally, can we manage our landscapes and properties economically and environmentally in a way that helps meet everybody's needs? So, that all being said, I encourage you to download our Choose Native guide. This is available for free and it's available in English and Spanish. So, that QR code will take you to our website where you can download a copy of the Choose Native guide. Paper copies are limited, but you can request them via email, which my email will be on the next screen. And I can't promise you that we'll have any left, but I will do my best to connect you with a paper copy if I can. Our website is also there, seagrant.psu/choose native. So that is where you can find that information if the QR code doesn't work for you. Finally, just thank you. Thank you for listening. You can reach me at ars26@psu.edu, and there are our websites for Sea Grant and Extension, seagrant.psu.edu and extension.psu.edu. So if you have any further questions, don't hesitate to reach out. It's been a pleasure to provide this presentation for your Native Plant Summit. And I'll end with just sharing the resources slides and saying thank you one more time. So enjoy the rest of your summit, and I look forward to connecting with you.
Thank you so much for spending this time with us and for being a part of this growing conversation. We hope this session leaves you feeling a little bit more connected to native plants, to place, and to the community working right alongside you.